The massive creature stood in Raymond Anderson's doorway, holding something small and fragile against its chest. 8 feet of muscle and ancient intelligence filled the frame, but its eyes held a desperate gentleness that made Raymond's breath catch. In those dark depths, he saw the same grief that had haunted his own reflection for the past 3 years. The thing in the creature's arms was human, a baby, and it was crying. Raymond had lived alone on his mountain farm for 67 years, the last 3 without his beloved wife Judith. He thought he understood solitude. He thought he had seen everything these ancient woods could offer. But as the creature stepped forward, its massive hand extended in what could only be described as a plea, Raymond realized his world was about to change forever. Before we see how this ends, tell us where you are watching from and hype this video in the comments. The story had begun 6 months earlier when the first sounds drifted down from the ridge above Raymond's cabin. Deep, mournful calls that seemed to echo from the very bones of the earth. At first he dismissed them as elk, or perhaps a bear in distress. The mountains held many mysteries, and after decades of living here, Raymond had learned to respect them without always needing explanations. But the sounds persisted. Night after night, those haunting cries would roll down through the pine and fir, settling over his small farm like a blanket of sorrow. They spoke of loss in a language that transcended species. Raymond found himself stepping onto his porch each evening, listening with an attention that surprised him. Something in those calls resonated with the hollow ache in his chest, the space where Judith's laughter used to live. The first physical evidence appeared on a Tuesday morning in late September. Raymond was checking his fence line when he found them. Footprints in the soft mud beside the creek. Each print was nearly 2 feet long and sank deep enough to suggest a weight that defied explanation. The stride length was impossible. No bear walked upright with such purpose. No human possessed feet of that size. Raymond knelt beside the clearest print, his weathered hands trembling slightly as he traced its outline. 5 distinct toes, an arch that spoke of bipedal locomotion. The depth suggested something massive, yet capable of moving with surprising grace through the dense forest. He had heard the stories, of course. Every mountain dweller had. But stories were one thing. The cold reality of mud between his fingers was another entirely. Over the following weeks, more signs appeared. Branches broken at heights no bear could reach. Massive handprints on the bark of old-growth pines. Areas where something large had bedded down in the soft earth, leaving impressions that spoke of a creature both powerful and intelligent. Raymond began to feel watched during his daily routines. Not threatened, but observed with a patience that suggested deep intelligence. The feeling intensified as autumn deepened into winter. Raymond would catch glimpses of movement at the tree line, shadows that seemed too large and too purposeful to be natural. Sometimes he would find small offerings left near his cabin, smooth river stones arranged in careful patterns, pine cones stacked with geometric precision, feathers from birds he had never seen, placed delicately on his porch railing. He began leaving offerings of his own, apples from his small orchard, fresh bread, clean water in a metal bowl. Each morning the offerings would be gone and replaced by those strange gifts from the forest. A communication was developing, though Raymond could not have explained its rules or purpose to another living soul. The breakthrough came on a night in December when the first heavy snow was falling. Raymond was splitting wood by lamplight when he heard something that stopped his axe mid-swing. Not the deep calls he had grown accustomed to, but something higher, more urgent. The sound of distress from something young and vulnerable. Following the sound into the darkness, Raymond found himself at the edge of his property where the forest began in earnest. His lantern cast dancing shadows between the trees, and in those shadows he saw them. The adult creature stood nearly 9 feet tall, its massive frame covered in dark hair that seemed to absorb the lamplight. But it was not the creature's size that made Raymond's heart race. It was the way it cradled something small against its chest, rocking gently back and forth in a gesture so universally parental that it transcended species. The creature's eyes met Raymond's across the small clearing, and in that moment, understanding passed between them. The thing in the creature's arms was injured or ill. The desperate sounds Raymond had been hearing were not calls of territory or dominance, but the cries of a parent seeking help for its young. Raymond set his lantern down slowly, his movements deliberate and non-threatening. He had no idea what he was dealing with, but he recognized desperation when he saw it. The creature watched him with an intelligence that was unmistakably aware, unmistakably evaluating. It was deciding whether to trust him. Moving with the careful precision of someone approaching a wounded animal, Raymond backed toward his cabin. He returned with blankets, warm milk, and a small first aid kit. The creature had not moved. It stood in the falling snow like a statue, waiting to see what this strange human would do. Raymond spread the blankets on the ground and placed the milk and medical supplies beside them. Then he retreated to the edge of the clearing and waited. For long minutes, nothing happened. The snow continued to fall. The creature continued to rock its burden, and Raymond continued to wait with the patience of a man who had learned that the most important things in life could not be rushed. Finally, the creature stepped forward. Its movements were fluid despite its massive size, each step placed with careful consideration. It knelt beside the blankets and, with infinite gentleness, placed its burden down. Raymond's breath caught. It was indeed a baby, human but somehow different. The child's features held an otherworldly quality that spoke of mixed heritage, of two worlds briefly touching. The creature looked up at Raymond, and in its eyes was a question as old as parenthood itself. Will you help? Can I trust you with the most precious thing in my world? Raymond nodded slowly, understanding passing between them without need for words. He approached the child with the same careful movements, checking for fever, for obvious injuries, for signs of distress. The baby was cold and dehydrated, but otherwise seemed healthy. Raymond wrapped it in the warm blankets and offered small sips of the milk. The creature watched every movement with the intensity of a parent monitoring a doctor's examination. When the child's cries subsided and color returned to its small face, the creature's massive shoulders sagged with visible relief. What followed was the strangest night of Raymond's long life. The creature remained at the edge of the clearing while Raymond tended to the child in his cabin. Every hour, Raymond would step onto his porch and signal that all was well. The creature would respond with a low rumble that somehow conveyed gratitude and continued vigilance. As dawn approached, the child had recovered enough to take more substantial nourishment. Raymond prepared a bottle and stepped outside to find the creature waiting exactly where he had left it, snow covering its broad shoulders like a mantle. It had not moved through the entire night, maintaining its vigil with a dedication that spoke of love beyond human understanding. The exchange happened without discussion. Raymond approached with the child, now warm and fed and sleeping peacefully. The creature extended its massive hands, and Raymond placed the baby gently into that careful embrace. For a moment, their hands touched, human and something far older, and Raymond felt a connection that would change him forever. The creature stood slowly, cradling its young with infinite care. It looked at Raymond one last time, and in that gaze was a communication more profound than words. Gratitude, recognition, a bond forged in the crucible of shared concern for the vulnerable. Then it turned and melted into the forest with a silence that seemed impossible for something so large. Raymond stood in his doorway until the sun rose, processing what he had experienced. He had crossed a threshold that night, moving from the ordinary world into something far more mysterious. The rational part of his mind struggled to accept what had happened, but the evidence was undeniable. The footprints in the snow, the lingering sense of presence, the profound certainty that he had been trusted with something sacred. In the days that followed, life returned to its normal rhythms. But Raymond found himself changed. The solitude that had felt so heavy after Judith's death now carried a different quality. He was alone, yes, but no longer isolated. Something in the forest knew him now, recognized him as worthy of trust. The knowledge was both humbling and transformative. The offerings continued, but they carried new meaning now. The smooth stones and carefully arranged pine cones were no longer mysterious tokens, but messages from a friend. Raymond began to understand their significance. Each gift was a communication, a way of saying that the bond formed that snowy night remained strong. Months passed, spring arrived with its usual burst of green life, and Raymond threw himself into the work of his small farm with renewed energy. But always he remained aware of the presence in the forest. Sometimes he would catch glimpses of movement in the tree line. Sometimes he would find new gifts on his porch. The connection endured, growing stronger with time. It was on a warm evening in early summer that the creature returned. Raymond was sitting on his porch, enjoying the long twilight, when he sensed movement at the forest's edge. The massive figure emerged from the shadows, but this time it was not alone. A smaller figure walked beside it, moving with the careful steps of a toddler learning to navigate the world. Raymond's heart swelled with recognition. The child he had helped care for that winter night was thriving, growing strong under its parents' protection. The creature approached the porch with the same careful movements Raymond remembered. But now there was confidence in its posture, the assurance of one approaching a trusted friend. The child, now walking but still small enough to be dwarfed by its massive parent, looked up at Raymond with curious eyes that held hints of both human intelligence and something far older. It was a being caught between worlds, carrying the heritage of both species in its small frame. The creature placed a gentle hand on the child's shoulder, encouraging it forward. With the fearless curiosity of youth, the child approached Raymond's porch. It carried something in its small hands, a gift carefully selected and precious in the way that only a child's offering can be. It was a flower, but unlike any Raymond had ever seen. The petals seemed to shimmer with their own light, and the fragrance carried hints of wild honey and mountain air. Raymond accepted the gift with the solemnity it deserved, understanding that he was being honored in a way few humans had ever experienced. The child smiled, an expression that bridged the gap between species and spoke to the universal language of joy and connection. The creature watched this exchange with obvious pride and satisfaction. Its young had chosen to trust the human who had helped save its life. The circle was complete. What had begun in desperation and fear had grown into something beautiful and enduring. As the evening deepened, the creature and its child prepared to leave. But before departing, the massive being approached Raymond directly. It reached out with one enormous hand and placed it gently over Raymond's heart. The gesture was unmistakably one of gratitude and blessing, a recognition of the bond they shared. Then, as silently as they had come, the two figures melted back into the forest. Raymond sat on his porch long into the night, the strange flower in his hands, processing the magnitude of what he had experienced. He had been chosen as the guardian of one of the world's greatest secrets, trusted with knowledge that would have shattered the understanding of most humans. In the months and years that followed, the visits continued sporadically. Sometimes the creature would appear alone, checking on its human friend with the loyalty of one who never forgot a kindness. Sometimes it brought its growing child, who seemed to regard Raymond as a beloved uncle from another world. Each encounter deepened the bond between them, creating a friendship that transcended the boundaries of species and understanding. Raymond learned to read the subtle signs that announced their visits, the particular quality of silence that settled over the forest when they were near, the way the usual sounds of wildlife would pause, as if the entire mountain was holding its breath in respect. These became precious moments in Raymond's life, connections to a mystery that made his solitude not just bearable but meaningful. As the child grew, Raymond watched its development with the pride of a surrogate grandfather. It learned to walk with increasing confidence, to communicate through gesture and expression, to navigate the complex world between human and something far older. The creature was clearly a devoted parent, patient and protective while still encouraging independence and growth. The gifts continued to flow both ways. Raymond would leave offerings of food, warm clothing during winter months, small toys that he carved from wood for the growing child. In return, he received treasures from a world most humans never glimpsed, stones that seemed to hold starlight, feathers from birds that existed only in the deepest wilderness, seeds from plants that grew in hidden valleys where no human foot had ever trod. But perhaps the greatest gift was the transformation in Raymond himself. The crushing loneliness that had followed Judith's death gradually gave way to a different kind of solitude. He was alone in human terms, yes, but connected to something far greater. His grief for his lost wife remained, but it was tempered now by wonder and purpose. He had become the keeper of a secret that filled his life with meaning. The final visit came on a day in late autumn, 3 years after that first desperate encounter in the snow. Raymond was working in his garden when he felt the familiar presence. He looked up to see the creature approaching, but something was different. Its posture spoke of farewell, of endings and new beginnings. The child, now tall enough to reach Raymond's waist, ran ahead with the enthusiasm of youth. It had grown beautiful and strong, a perfect blend of its dual heritage. Its eyes held intelligence and kindness, curiosity about the world tempered by the wisdom of its unique upbringing. It would soon be ready to find its own place in the vast wilderness, to perhaps start a family of its own. The creature approached Raymond with obvious emotion. It placed both massive hands on the old man's shoulders, looking directly into his eyes with an intensity that conveyed volumes. This was goodbye, but not just any goodbye. This was the farewell of a parent whose child was grown, of a friend whose path was at a verging, of a guardian whose watch was ending. The child presented Raymond with a final gift, something that took his breath away. It was a carving, clearly made by the creature's own hands, depicting the three of them together. Raymond in his simple human form, the creature in all its massive dignity, and the child standing between them, connecting two worlds that should never have touched. The artistry was extraordinary, showing a level of skill and emotional understanding that spoke to the creature's deep intelligence. Every detail was perfect, from the expression of wonder on Raymond's face, to the protective stance of the creature, to the innocent joy radiating from the child. It was a masterpiece created not for display, but for memory, a tangible reminder of a friendship that had changed all their lives. As the sun began to set, painting the mountains in shades of gold and purple, the time for farewell arrived. The creature knelt before Raymond, bringing its massive frame down to human level one final time. It reached out and touched Raymond's face with infinite gentleness, a gesture so tender that it brought tears to the old man's eyes. The child embraced Raymond with the fierce affection of youth, holding tight to this strange friend who had been part of its earliest memories. When it finally sit up back, its eyes were bright with unshed tears, understanding that this parting was different from all the others. Then, hand in hand, the creature and its child walked toward the tree line. At the forest's edge, they turned back once more. The creature raised its hand in a gesture that was unmistakably a wave, a final acknowledgement of their bond. The child copied the motion, its small hand moving in perfect mimicry of its parent, and then they were gone, melting into the shadows between the trees with the silence that had always marked their presence. Raymond stood in his garden until full darkness fell, holding the carved gift and feeling the weight of the secret he would carry for the rest of his days. In the years that followed, Raymond never saw them again, but he never doubted their continued existence somewhere in the vast wilderness. The mountains held their secrets well, protecting those who needed protection and honoring those who had earned honor. Sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind was still, he thought he heard distant calls from the high ridges, but whether they were meant for him or simply part of the eternal conversation of the wild, he could never say. The carving became his most treasured possession, displayed prominently in his cabin, where he could see it every day. It served as a constant reminder that wonder still existed in the world, that intelligence and compassion could bridge any gap, that friendship could flourish in the most unlikely circumstances. Raymond's life took on a different rhythm after their departure. The solitude remained, but it was no longer empty. He had been chosen as the keeper of one of the world's greatest secrets, trusted with knowledge that connected him to something far greater than his small human existence. The responsibility was both humbling and ennobling. He never spoke of his experiences to another soul. When neighbors asked about his improved spirits, his renewed energy, his obvious contentment despite his isolation, he simply smiled and spoke of finding peace with his memories of Judith. It was not entirely untrue. His grief for his wife had indeed found its proper place, but that healing had come through connection to something that transcended human understanding. The farm prospered under his renewed attention. He found purpose in maintaining the boundary between the human world and the wild, ensuring that his small piece of land remained a safe haven for any creature that might need it. He kept the tradition of offerings, leaving food and water at the frost's edge, never knowing if they were taken by his old friends or simply by the ordinary wildlife that shared the mountain. As Raymond aged, his movements becoming slower and his strength gradually diminishing, he often wondered what would happen to the secret he carried. Would it die with him, becoming just another mystery lost to time? Or would the creatures find another human worthy of their trust, someone else to serve as a bridge between worlds? The answer came on a morning in early spring, nearly 10 years after that final farewell. Raymond was sitting on his porch, enjoying the warmth of the sun on his weathered face, when movement at the tree line caught his attention. His heart leaped at the familiar massive silhouette emerge from the shadows. But this was not the creature he remembered. This was younger, smaller though still impressively large, with features that spoke of a new generation. As it approached with the careful movements Raymond remembered so well, he realized he was looking at the child he had helped save all those years ago, now grown to full maturity and carrying a burden of its own. In its arms was another small figure, another child caught between worlds and in need of the kind of help that only a trusted human could provide. The cycle was beginning again, the secret passing from one generation to the next, the bond between species continuing despite the passage of time. Raymond struggled to his feet, his old bones protesting, but his spirit soaring with joy and purpose. He had wondered if he would die, carrying in his secret alone. But now he understood that some truths were too important to be lost. The creatures had returned because they remembered, because they honored the trust that had been built through patience and compassion. As the grown child approached, Raymond saw in its eyes the same intelligence and gentleness he remembered, now tempered with the wisdom of parenthood and the weight of responsibility. It had learned well from its massive parent, understanding the delicate balance required to maintain the connection between worlds. The new child in its arms looked up at Raymond with curious eyes that held hints of both human warmth and something far older. Another being caught between species, carrying the potential for bridge building in its very existence. Raymond felt the familiar stirring of purpose, the recognition that his life still held meaning and responsibility. With movements made careful by age but steady with determination, Raymond prepared to begin the cycle again. He gathered blankets, warm milk, and the simple offerings that had served him so well before. The grown child watched him with obvious approval, recognizing the preparations and understanding that the human remembered the protocols of trust. As Raymond tended to the new child, he felt the presence of the original creature somewhere in the shadows of the forest. It was watching, ensuring that its offspring was safe, that the human who had earned trust so long ago remained worthy of it. The knowledge filled Raymond with profound satisfaction. He had been tested and found faithful, deemed worthy to serve as guardian for another generation. The night that followed was a mirror of that first desperate encounter. But now Raymond moved with the confidence of experience. He knew the rhythms of care, the delicate balance of help and respect that these encounters required. The grown child remained vigilant but relaxed, trusting in the bond that had been forged through years of faithful friendship. When dawn came and the new child was safe and healthy, Raymond felt a completeness that had eluded him for years. His purpose was clear. His place in the grand design is secure. He was the bridge between worlds, the keeper of secrets, the guardian of trust that transcended species and understanding. As the grown child prepared to leave with its offspring, it approached Raymond with the same gesture its parent had used so long ago. It placed one massive hand over the old man's heart, conveying gratitude and recognition and the promise that the bond would endure. Then it reached into a pouch at its side and withdrew something that made Raymond's breath catch. It was another carving, this one depicting Raymond as an old man surrounded by creatures of various sizes and ages. In the carving, he stood at the center of a family that spanned species, honored as elder and protector and friend. The artistry was even more refined than the first carving, showing that the skills and intelligence of these beings continued to evolve and grow. With that final gift, the grown child and its offspring melted back into the forest, leaving Raymond alone with his memories and his renewed purpose. He understood now that his life had been shaped by forces far greater than his own understanding, that he had been chosen for a role that would continue until his final breath. The secret would endure. The trust would be maintained. And somewhere in the vast wilderness, intelligence and compassion would continue to bridge the gap between worlds, ensuring that wonder and mystery remained alive in a world that too often forgot the magic that still existed in its deepest places. Raymond returned to his cabin, the new carving in his hands, knowing that his solitude was no longer empty, but full of purpose and connection. He was the keeper of secrets, the guardian of trust, the bridge between worlds that should never have touched but had found a way to meet in the space between fear and wonder.